Good evening, everyone. What a nice evening. I'm so pleased to welcome back Matt Goldman and David Ricciardi, who I think actually we have put together before, have we not?
Yes,
Last year.
with Robin Purcell, I think.
Yes, it was the
Yeah.
first 100-degree day in Scottsdale last March, I think it was.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen,
So-
it's 112 today, so all in all, it's probably a happier thing for you that you are appearing here on the screen rather than here in person. It's just been brutal. We've set a new record for days over 110. This is day 35 or 36.
Oh my goodness.
I know.
Oh my.
I know, it's been awful, but so adding to all the other awfuls, it's one of those years. As somebody said, 2020 is a year that could have been written by Stephen King, although I'm not sure if that's sadistic. We'll see. Anyway, just so you all know, watching this, both Matt and David have autographed copies of their new books. Matt's is called Dead West. David's is called Black Flag. And we have autographed copies just waiting for you to buy them. Meantime, we're going to talk about them. So Dead West is Matt Goldman's fourth book for PI Neil Shapiro. And Matt is a playwright and Emmy Award-winning television writer for Seinfeld, Ellen, and other shows. So you can already tell there will be humor in his mysteries. And he's been nominated for the Seamus and Nero Awards, which I think is a real tribute to the quality of his books. He's gotten rave reviews. He had a star review for this book, which I quoted in our e-news. But he won my heart with Gone to Dust, Neil Shapiro's first case, which we could talk about, which just has this killer opening scene and premise that I liked a lot. Right, Matt?
Yes.
And we've talked about all your books here at the Poison Pen, so this is fun.
Yep.
Yep. So, David, you decided, I love Black Flag, because what could be a better title than a book about piracy?
Yeah, thanks. It was something a little bit of a different departure for Jay Keller, who's my ongoing hero. Got away from sort of the terrorist angle and went back to straight criminal enterprise.
He did. Your last book was called Rogue Strike. First one was Warning Light. And from the reviews that I have read of Black Flag, it's generally considered that you, like Matt, keep upping your game. So I guess we could start out asking you both that question. Do you feel that each of you has upped your game with this book?
I hope so. I want to. I make quite an effort not to write the same book every single time. I know in series that sometimes can happen, but I'm trying to up it both in the quality of the book and in the life of the character to see that he is progressing in his life as an investigator, in his personal life. I think his personal relationships are really important, and I hope my storytelling abilities are getting better with each book.
Do you think that writing for television has helped you in terms of crafting these novels?
It definitely has, because I've worked on so many stories. I've worked on about 500 episodes of television. And of course, I didn't write all those, but I was one of the writers involved in coming up with the story, taking it through its various paces, getting it to the actors, hearing it read, getting it on its feet, seeing our mistakes, fixing it as much as we can, fixing it again in editing. So I think I'm certainly no story genius, but I think just doing it that many times has beat a few basics into my head. So, and I think it shows in the books. I hope it does.
I think it does too. David, what's your background?
So I actually just started writing a few years ago. I'm pretty much the antithesis of Matt. Warning Light was the first thing I had written since I was in college. So I had no professional writing training, but I just loved the thriller genre and was an avid reader. And one day I was reading a great book by James Thayer called 5 Past Midnight. And I looked up his bibliography, and there was a book on how to write a novel. So I picked that up and I read it, and I said, you know what, it's time to stop cutting bait and start fishing. So I bought a laptop and started working on it, and that turned into Warning Light.
So do you feel that Black Flag indeed that, Rogue Strike and then Black Flag, you have stepped up, and if you have, how do you think that has happened?
So I would say for me, the process of writing a book takes, and I know Matt's different. He and I spoke about this last year, but for me, it takes 9 to 12 months to write a book because I do it in my spare time, as if any of us have spare time, but discretionary time, I guess is probably a better way to put it. But so over that length of time, like the newness of it, the suspense is all, I don't want to say beaten out of it, but it's such a different creature when it's finished from when I started it. And I do think that Matt talked about there's this evolution that you go through as a writer where you try to develop the character, you try to develop the stories to make them different. And I do feel as if my character development in Black Flag was better and my storytelling was better. Whether or not it's a better book, I think is dependent upon each individual's taste. And I hope everybody thinks it's the best book in the series, and I hope they think that the one after this is even better. So yeah, I'd like to see continuous improvement.
So one thing you both have done is that you've changed location in this book. So since we're talking to you, tell us about where Black Flag largely takes place. I mean, it's an international thriller, it's a global thriller, right? But
sure. So most of it is set in the Horn of Africa, and Somalia specifically, which is for the last 20 years been voted the most dangerous nation on earth. And I'm not sure if she was giving me a hint or not, but when I told my wife I was setting the third book in Mogadishu, she said, "Oh, you should go visit and do some research." So there might have either been ignorance or insightful knowledge of the level of violence that's going on in Somalia at that point. But there's a part of the book takes place in Greece as well, where I have visited and spent a fair amount of time. But the trip to, I had to pass on the trip to Somalia, but I did have the advantage of several friends and friends of friends who either served there in the military, the intelligence community, diplomatic corps. And I had a translator help me out with some of the lingo of Somali natives. So there is a decent way to do the research to get a good feel for it.
So what's Jake's basic job?
So Jake, he was originally an analyst working for CIA, and a mission started to go south. And Jake stepped into the void and volunteered for it, and that's what happened back in Warning Light. And then when he got back, he had displayed such obvious talent for it that he was recruited into the Special Activities Center, formerly known as Special Activities Division. And he's since become a field operative. And he's a bit of a singleton, where he gets sent into these particularly difficult, hairy situations and is pretty much left on his own to fend for himself.
So you're never going to have a pretext for sending him off to new locations. I mean, that's just the nature of his job.
I can sort of pretty much anywhere we're good. Yeah, it's plausible for his background.
So I know that you have read Dead West. So why don't you talk to Matt about his shift in location? Because I think it's a really nifty one and dramatic. Yeah,
well, I mean, it goes back to Matt's background, and he's got Nils, who is a I guess Matt introduced me to the term Minnesota Nice. So Nils is a guy who's a private investigator, a former police officer out in Minneapolis, and he's hired by a wealthy family to investigate their grandson, who's due to get a big inheritance. Matt, tell me if I'm going too far.
No, that's all good.
It takes him to Los Angeles, which was Matt's stomping ground for 10, 12 years. I forgot how long.
More than that, yeah.
More than that, okay. But it takes him to L.A. and while in L.A., he's got a bit of a sidekick, a guy that helped him through a crisis the prior book, who he's become very close to, who helps him out, and he incorporates a lot of his experience in L.A. So I thought it was terrific.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry I didn't get yours. They were supposed to send it to me. I feel terrible.
It must be sold out nationally. Barbara's got the only copy left.
There it is, right?
I really wanted to. The first 3 books all take place in Minnesota, and Nils is a Minnesotan. And I have spent 20 plus years in Los Angeles working in television, and I've always felt like a bit of an outsider there. I've always felt like a Midwesterner just visiting. I no longer live there, but I wanted to take that Midwesterner who's not seen Los Angeles, both the good and the bad, and there is a lot of good, and just show it through his eyes and hear it through his voice, both the city and show business, because the grandson who's inherited these millions, the grandparents are scared to death he's investing it in show business. And in fact, as we find out right away, he is. But Nils gets involved with that when some things go awry. And Los Angeles is such a different beast of a place. Nils calls it the Wild West, and it really is, because in Minnesota, if you want to get to point A to point B in life, there's kind of a set way to do it. In Los Angeles, crazy things happen, like terrible failures, but great successes, and people can become an overnight success. If someone can be a hairstylist to a star one day and producing that star's movie the next day, like those things really happen. And so I just wanted to put Nils in that environment, and I've also really stepped up his personal life to the point where he has a lot to live for now. And so when I put him in an unknown world with a lot of danger, it really makes him question, is the risk worth it now that he's got his personal life in a place that he's good with?
Ooh, well, we can come back to risk talking to David, but going to Los Angeles gives you a chance to play off of some prototype Hollywood private eyes, because we go all the way back to Chandler, and we've got so many guys. So you're able to take Nils, the Minnesota nice guy, and put him in a strange place, and then you can have fun playing with all of that. Was that part of your reason for going there?
That was not part of my reason, but it was a discovery in the writing where, in Minnesota, a tough-talking, head-bashing PI isn't going to get very far. No one's going to want to share information with you and tell you their story and take you into their confidence. It just doesn't work here. But when Nils got out there, that Minnesota nice thing, when he tried using it, he just got walked all over. Nobody respected him, and they kind of brushed him aside. And they just paid him no attention whatsoever. So he had to become, and I didn't expect this was going to happen until I got into the writing, he had to become a little more devious and a little more tough to get what he wanted to get and do his job.
So we'll come back to motivation and the grandmother of the client, because she's a real piece of work. But back to David, you don't have to come up with pretext for sending him places. But I'm assuming you're going to work on a new book. I always have that hope anyway. How are you going to figure out the location part if you can't go anywhere right now? I realize you didn't want to go to Somalia, so we'll leave that aside. I have been very close to it. I have gone up the east coast of Africa, but we were one country north of South Africa. I'm trying to remember which was at one point.
If only we had a map.
Okay, so tell me. And I remember, because cruise ships have to go to one foreign country in order for them to be able to open casinos, and there's a whole lot of reasons. They can't just do a whole tour in South Africa, so they have to go somewhere. And they did go to Namibia, but they went up that way. And the capital city of the country that will come to be somewhere in this conversation is just fallen completely into ruins. But its train station was actually designed by Eiffel Tower. And it's this beautiful wrought iron structure. And it's just falling apart. Independence has not been necessarily good for every African nation. So I think it's Maputo is the name of the capital. Are we now figuring out the country?
Mozambique.
Thank you. That's it. Isn't that wonderful? You can fill out the holes in my aging brain. All right, Mozambique and Maputo. But Somalia is instead of just falling apart, is actively dangerous.
Right. So that's one of the reasons I said the book there. And to your other question, I worked there before. We can get into that in a little bit, but it's as I said before, it's the most dangerous country in the world, and Big finds himself caught between a couple of warlords who are getting the business of piracy going again. This Black Flag in the title, but they're not doing it like the old pirates who were, referred to as six guineas in a skiff, where they'd go out in a little dory with an outboard engine on the back and wave some AK-47s around and get a ship to stop. But those days are over. These guys are using helicopters and speedboats, and they're like a SEAL team descending on the ships, and the ships just disappear off radar and they're never seen from again. So somebody very well funded and very sinister is conducting this. And they just throw him down there with a CIA officer who's been in Africa most of his career and is kind of stuck in this backwater of a career posting. And the two of them have to make a go of it together and build that relationship and that trust, and figure out which warlord is responsible for it, and then figure out how to try to take him down.
So it's interesting you're talking about warlords, because Matt, often when we think of Los Angeles, we think about gangs and cartels.
Yeah.
And there's no real difference, is there, guys, between warlords in Africa and warlords running drug empires or gangs?
I mean, in Africa, they've displaced the government. There's really no organized government, and the warlords have sort of filled that void. In LA, I think it's probably a little bit different, but
yeah, Don Winslow will know.
That's true.
Yeah.
I was just offered an event by a New York Times reporter, which we will accept. I haven't got a date yet. Who has written some huge number of articles about cartels and how they work, and particularly about El Chapo, which I think, will be a very Patrick of our staff. Is a real true crime junkie.
Mm-hmm.
So he really likes doing this kind of thing. He's also a Winslow junkie, so he's probably well prepared. But it seems to me that the basic concept of these guys isn't that different, whether they're in Africa or whether they're in Los Angeles or Chicago or Russia or wherever they are. Collapse of colonial government with all this, all of the soul searching and revisionist stuff going on. The truth is that a lot of countries functioned well under colonialism, even if not to the advantage of those being colonized. And some of the countries that hung on to that machinery have done better than those that completely trashed it. I don't remember.
Yeah, the abrupt transition. I mean, it was a difficult period for Russia too. I mean, when they went, straight from the Gorbachev years to the Yeltsin years, that was super tough. So to your point, like almost a guided transition off of one system to another is probably a more successful recipe.
Well, when we were in Burma when it first opened up, we took the first commercial cruise down the Irrawaddy from Mandalay to Yangon, and it was really clear, especially when we got to Yangon, that by trashing the railroads and all of the administrative machinery, that they didn't have a really functioning government. And I think that that's so true in Africa, which would explain why Somalia is like that. So basically what you've got is a series of private entrepreneurs, except their enterprise is piracy. And instead of preying on other Africans inward, they are instead focusing on the shipping lanes outward. Yeah,
they're doing both, but the Somali people have really been the one who've been caught in the gears of a multi-party civil war for about 20 years. So it's been a tough setting, and frankly, it could be, if you live in a gang-controlled neighborhood out in LA, it might be the same thing. So,
Well, I have worse than gangs. I have show business agents and managers in my book. They're, they're,
Just as ruthless, right?
they're a ruthless. They're a ruthless, heartless group. Yeah.
So let's talk a moment. Speaking of ruthless and possibly heartless, let's talk about the grandmother who actually hires Niels to go to LA and see what her grandson is up to. Is that a typical Minnesota matron, or?
No, no, but a matriarch or patriarch like that can exist anywhere and in any family. And oddly enough, she's not like this character, but one of my, Chandler's famous books are The Long Goodbye and The Big Sleep. But I'm crazy about The High Window, and there is just a horrible woman who lives in Pasadena, and who hires Marlowe in that book, and it's just one of my favorite characters. And so even though my character is very different, I always thought I want to write a horrible old woman someday. I loved it so much reading about it that this is my own version of it. Yeah.
Well, she's a tough client for Neil. So at some point in a private eye novel, if the private eye doesn't agree with the client's motivation and so forth, what are the ethics involved?
Well, I think it's up to each PI. I mean, they're real PIs, the bulk of them, like real lawyers or real business people or real television writers for that matter, are more often than not going to go along with what their boss wants so they can keep working. Nils is someone who has a really strong moral code, so he will go against his clients sometime, and in this world, it was to his detriment often. It wasn't until the second book in the series when he teamed up with Eligard, who's much more of a straight and narrow, good business person, completely morally upright character, that it kind of took the pressure off Nils, because now there was an investigations business that would function regardless if Nils screws up one case or goes rogue a little bit. So, the PI, I think, is a strong counterculture figure, and people always ask me, why aren't there PI shows on American TV anymore? And I used to always say that those great PI shows we remember, like Rockford, came out of Vietnam and Watergate, when there was this distrust of authority. And so this counterculture figure out there making the world better, I think, appealed to people. And I think after 9/11, that went out the window. And we looked more to our institutions. But now our country's has a lot of unrest again, and maybe it's time for the PI to come back.
Well, I think you could see that reflected in part in the success of the superhero franchises. We'd all like one of those guys to come in, and clean up Gotham,
yes,
or whatever it might be. I was looking at the Miracle Mile riots in Chicago, where I grew up, and which is a territory that I know really well, is that it would have been wonderful if Superman had bounded down on Michigan Avenue and knocked all of them together, gathered them up, and thrown them away. I mean, it was just real criminality. Sorry?
Put them in a net and drop them in the river.
Well, something like that. They brought vans in order to, haul the merchandise away. And it'll be interesting, because I think that a tool that has come into play that didn't exist so much before, but it happened here in Scottsdale, because we had a miniature version of that riot, not right here at the bookstore, but just over the canal at the big shopping mall, is that with all the CCTV now, they can identify these people. But the really interesting part was here is that a lot of them took it as a social media opportunity. So they nailed the guy that trashed the Mercedes dealer because he posted photos of himself on Instagram. And it's like not too hard, dude, to get you. So I think that there's a lot of with facial recognition techniques and all kinds of things. There are going to be some changes in how we deal with riots. But I also think as distrust of the police is gaining some credibility, you're right that the idea of the private eye, the person you can hire to protect you or advance your interests may become more popular again, as we all kind of search for somebody like that. I wish we had somebody like that. But Jake, on the other hand, so what kind of code of ethics can a guy have that works for the CIA that's set out on an op? Is he allowed somewhere in midstream to say, I don't want to do this, or I'm on the wrong team, or whatever?
So Jake has had an ongoing conflict with his boss since the get-go. His boss is a very Machiavellian type character who is always focused on the forest, even at the expense of the trees, and is looking really at the end game as opposed to the, maybe let's call it the interim human cost. And while Jake's in Somalia and he's getting a feel for the devastation and the human suffering and it's going through its third famine in 19 years and just the internally displaced persons and the refugees and all these awful things that are going on there and how the complete lack of human rights. And his boss is, I don't want to give too much away, but his boss asks him to do something that Jake finds, ethically challenging. And there's a big tete-a-tete which continues to build throughout the story until Jake finally tells his boss, I'm not doing it. And the way Jake is inserted into these situations, he's what the agency calls a singleton, which means he's generally off by his own. He's got a partner down in Somalia, but Jake's kind of running the show, and it's not a big operation. It's pretty much a one-man band. So he's got this ethical problem, I wouldn't say like Dills does, but he's got a strong code of ethics, personal ethics, and sometimes that bumps up against what his boss and the agency are looking for in the end game.
I think in a lot of international thrillers where, people are working for people they don't necessarily admire or agree with, that this kind of thing comes up. I mean, I've seen it with Scott Harvath and Brad Thor. We've seen it in Alex Berenson, guy, I can't remember his name at the moment, but there were, I think, 10 books with Alex's guy. It does seem to be, just as the PI that Matt and I were talking about, it does seem to be part of writing the international agent, that the agent has sometimes got to choose between personal ethics or personal loyalties and whatever mission that he is on. But, conflict is the stuff that books are made out of, right? That thrillers are made out of, so it would be pretty boring if everybody just agreed.
Right.
Right. So for people who haven't read you, let's go back to Matt and tell us about the opening of Gone to Dust, which I still think is one of the great opening in crime fiction. I absolutely love it.
Oh, thanks. So in Gone to Dust, a woman is found murdered in her home, and the area around her body and most of the house is covered in the dust and dirt from hundreds of vacuum cleaner bags. So there was so much in that dust and dirt, there was so much hair and fiber and DNA samples that the crime cannot be solved in the lab. It's too contaminated of a scene. And so that forces the suburban police department in Edina, Minnesota, which is where I actually live. By the way, here's a tip. Don't live in Edina. Move out of it for a little while and write a book that kind of makes fun of their police department and then move back. I drive very slowly. I come to a complete stop at all stop signs. But this there's not been a murder here in over 20 years, and there were no officers who've actively investigated a murder before, so they need help. And that's why they bring in my private detective, Nils Shapiro. That introduces him, and he does so when he reunites. Nils' backstory is that he was a police cadet at Minneapolis, and right after they graduated, they were laid off, which really happened here in the 80s. Everybody knew they would be rehired in a few months, but it was like last hired, first fired. But two of the cadets did not wait around to be rehired. One was Nils Shapiro, who became a private detective, and the other was Anders Ellegard, who went to work for Edina PD. So now in that first book, it's 16 or 17 years later, and they're reunited. And that's one of the main relationships that continues throughout the series.
I just love the way that you foiled forensics by dumping vacuum cleaner bags all over, because you're right,
I think
you never separate out all the hair and all the skin cells and all the dust and all the pet hair.
Yeah, I think I haven't looked at that book in a while. It came out probably exactly 3 years ago. But the crime scene investigators, their unit, they didn't even know what to do. I think Nils described it as they were all sitting in their van looking like they were trying to get up the nerve to ask somebody to prom. Like, that's the last time they've been that unsure of themselves. So
it's a great start for those of you who are watching. I can't recommend Gone to Dust enough. I think that Matt really has a genius for setting up the PI novel with an unexpected beginning, and then of course he has to deliver a surprise ending. So there you are. So David, Morning Light, tell us a little bit about it. We've alluded to it, but
sure. So that was the first book in the Jake Keller series, and that started off with him on an airplane flying to Singapore, and all of a sudden the airplane starts having some mechanical issues, and it has to make an emergency landing in Iran. Except it turns out that it's not really an emergency landing, and that was how he was being inserted into the country. So he's sent in on an extremely time-sensitive operation to examine a secret complex that had been exposed by an earthquake. There's a lot of earthquakes in Iran in real life. And they had about 72 hours to get somebody in there, and they couldn't find anybody else so Jake volunteered to go in. And while he's in there, he's wholly unprepared. He's an analyst at CIA. He was the guy who sort of scoped out the mission, and he gets arrested 10 minutes after he steps off the plane. And it turns into a story of survival and basically a chase novel where, with literally no resources, nothing but the clothes on his back, he has to figure out a way out of the country and back to safety. And the Iranians frame him once he escapes, so that he can't use his identity, he can't use anything once he gets out of the country, and he has to be completely self-reliant all the way back to back home.
So in a way, if you're a Jack Carr reader and you like this kind of book, I think Warning Light works, although in Jack Carr's book, the guy is a trained naval SEAL and killer, and Jake is really not. So I like the fact that you put him in so far over his head, and then there he is trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, what I wanted for a reader to be looking at this and saying, okay, what if I were in his shoes? Like, what would I do if I were in a foreign country? I didn't speak the language. I didn't even have shoes on my feet, and there were people chasing me. I don't have any money. I don't even know where I am. I'm like, literally, one of the lines in that book is, an age where there's a GPS in every car, phone, and boat. Jake was figuring out direction by the sun, and that's how he was figuring out where he had to go. And that's, so I wanted the reader to be able to say, okay, what if that were me? What would I do in that situation?
Well, probably the ordinary reader would not have volunteered to be inserted into Iran, so I don't think that you can say that, he's necessarily every man. But once he's there, yeah. It's interesting, too. We become so dependent upon all this tech, all these gadgets, that, how many of you even know phone numbers anymore the way we used to? that if you're suddenly deprived of them, or they don't work, how many of us have basic skills left, like figuring out direction by the sun, or estimating distances, or filtering water, or all kinds of things. I mean, I think increasingly that people are unprepared for this.
Yeah.
I see Pat coming at us. Let's see if he has any questions that somebody has asked before we carry on.
Karen Auden has a great question. She says, aside from Chandler, who has been mentioned, who are some of your influences?
All right, Matt. So aside from Raymond Chandler, who might be some of your influences?
Joe Nesbo, who's a Norwegian writer. He writes a series, Harry Hole. Anthony Horowitz, who's an English writer. The Magpie Murders, it's actually Magpie Murders, is one of my favorite books of all time. Hammett, Reed Farrell Coleman's Mo Prager series, Spencer. I always blank when I'm asked this question. I need to have a list. It's quite a list, and I read a lot of crime fiction and also just regular fiction as well. So I just read a book by James McBride called Deacon King Kong that is not showing up in my Nils stories, but that kind of storytelling I think will have an influence on me. That book made a big impact on me.
David, how about you?
So I can trace my love of writing and the thriller genre back to, I would say, Tom Clancy, Nelson DeMille, Ken Follett, just some guys. I'm dating myself here, obviously, putting a little age stamp right on the screen, but they were guys who, for me, developed these great characters, these great settings, and each book that I got involved in, I don't want to say it was like a vacation, because there was always a lot of tension and conflict, as you alluded to earlier, but it was immersive, and that's one of the things I took away from reading, what I would consider to be three masters of the genre, is that I really want the book to be immersive. I find a page turner, not to make it sound superficial, but I find a page turner is great because it pulls you away from everything, and especially given the crazy year we're having in every way, shape, and form. I just got a case of books from the Poison Pen today, because I always like being able to just crack open a great book. And in fact, I ordered 4 Vince Flynn books that I had probably read when he wrote them originally, and decided I wanted to read them again. So Vince probably was the guy who was, in addition to James Thayer, was probably the one who inspired me to start writing again, or to start writing.
Vince lived about a mile from where I am right now. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Yes.
He's a Minnesota. Speaking of Vince, I was able to announce today that we're going to debut Kyle Mills's new Vince Flynn Mitch Rapp novel on September 14th with Brad Thor as a special guest, because Brad was a big fan of Vince and very much values Kyle. I'm going to toss in 2 older books to David's answer that you may not have read, but which I think are great. One of them was brought up Sunday by Robert Povey. It's called The Eiger Sanction by Trevanian, which I think is a fabulous thriller and was sort of a breakaway book. And the other really basic, fabulous thriller is by Jeffrey Household, and it's called Rogue Male. Rogue Male is one of them. I mean, it's like a definitive manhunt, and even before Eye of the Needle, very much in that vein. So if you haven't read The Eiger Sanction or Rogue Male, I can certainly recommend them. Another question?
Avi Staschenfeld asks, do either of you engage in selecting a reader for the Audible version? If so, how? And does the author work with the reader to get the proper voice?
We're talking about audiobooks, so what's your experience with audiobooks?
Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I have more experience working with actors than I do writing novels. So when it came time for the audiobook, I insisted on veto power in my contract. I was fortunate that I had 4 different offers, so I could use that. I don't direct them. They work with somebody else who does that. But I think it's a really important decision who narrates these things, and so I just insisted on having that power to get the voice right. I had a strange thing happen, which was McLeod Andrews did the first 3 books and did a good job, a really nice job. But then he got to go on paternity leave. Good for him. He had a baby, which is lovely. And so he wasn't able to do my 4th book, but Bronson Pinchot did it. He did a great job. So it's a little bit of a shift for the readers who are used to one voice. But I think it's really important in audio, those actors, just like in a movie or a TV show, they can make it or break it at the audio level.
Yeah, I went through 5 suggestions before I ended up choosing the reader. And just like Matt said, it was the pacing, the voice, the emphasis. I had somebody, Meg Gardner actually told me, never listen to your own audiobook because it won't sound the same as you have it in your head, and it'll drive you crazy. And she was right. I made it about 2 paragraphs into it, but I absolutely love it. And it was really important to me to get the right individual. And I've gotten a lot of compliments, so I'm very happy with it. And we're going to use the same guy for all 4 books.
So in the audio script, is there any condensation, or is there stuff left out, or is it word for word? I mean, would some of this...
So they go word for word, and I usually get a request, and I'm sure Matt does the same thing, but I usually get a request a few weeks before they're about to record it, and there will be a list of maybe 100 words on there, and say, how do you pronounce this? And like if I write Boeing 777, I say, okay, you can call that a 777, or you can call it a 77, but don't call it a 777. Little things like that, or
right.
How do you pronounce this person's name, or how do you pronounce this city? And I've got a lot of foreign locales, so I probably get more questions like that than most. But it's not so much. In fact, when I've suggested they leave something out just for clarity, they really don't like to do that. They want it to be almost like as if you could read it from the book and have it be verbatim.
Yeah, it's word for word as far as I know. I know when David Sedaris does live performances of his own books, he makes changes. He doesn't have to say he said, she said so much because he's doing the voices. But when someone else reads your book, they do it as written.
David, can you hold up that mug again for a moment?
Oh, this? Sorry.
Ah, there
Just,
it is.
Ah!
There. I thought I saw that blood spot as it went by. Oh, very nice. Thank you. Pat, do you have another question?
Stephanie Heinemann would like to know, to both authors, what are they working on now, and what other projects are they working on in the far future?
All right, what are you guys writing now, and do you have any projects sort of in the far future that are on your mind? Matthew, you're up.
Oh, thank you, David. I'm writing a standalone for Forge, taking a break from Nils at the moment. Oh. And there will be a Nils short story in Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine. I'll post about that when I know the exact issue. But that's what I'm doing at the moment. And I did make a 2-book contract with Forge, so I know I'm writing a couple more books with them, and I know what the next one is, but I don't know exactly what the one after that will be. So I do want to write more Nils books. And so we'll see where that happens. Yeah.
David?
So I'm working on the sequel to Black Flag, which will be the fourth book in the Jake Keller series, and it starts off with someone trying to kill Jake, and he doesn't know. He's back in the U.S., which is rare for him. He's pretty much trying to just get his life straight after that very difficult time in Somalia, and somebody is pressing him hard. There's explosions, there's people trying to run him off the road, and he is pretty much starting at ground zero trying to figure it out. And given the experience and the conflict he had with his boss, we talked about earlier, that ethical struggle that he constantly has with his boss, he doesn't know if it might be coming from inside CIA or if it's maybe somebody he crossed while he was in Greece or Somalia or China or Russia, any of these places that he's been operating over the past few years. So he's got to do some digging, and it's tough for him because he went through this identity change at the end of the first book, and he cut his ties to all of his friends and family, so he's very much alone. And emotionally it's a tough place for him because now he doesn't have this network of people that he knows and trusts, and he's got to build one. And he starts digging back to people from his relationships with, and he ends up using them to track down who's trying to kill him and then eventually go on offense.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of architecture for a book, so it may take you a little bit longer. Not every book in the pandemic, I think, has upended it. Not every author produces a book a year. Some are able to write more than one, but some are slowed down, and publishing dates have skewed all over the place as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah.
This August is the heaviest August I can ever remember because so many books that were scheduled to publish in May or June slid into August. So normally this is the quiet month, we all kind of brace for fall, clean out the store, do all that good stuff. And instead it's just like it's just an avalanche of authors and books, which is great because at this heat and with not going out, we'd all be going crazy. So it's an unparalleled opportunity to talk to as many people as we can, such as you too. So is there anything you'd like to ask each other before we sign off?
David, have you quit your day job yet?
No, I haven't, but I can promise you this isn't coffee right here either. Last year when we got together, Matt and I, had a nice bottle of Macallan Scotch, and
yes.
I was hoping to do it again this year, but we'll have to get together in 2021.
Yes, sounds like we're on the same schedule, so I would love that.
Well, so would I. I miss having you guys here. We don't get to do dinner. We don't get to do drinks. We don't get to laugh at the Hotel Valley Ho or dine at Virtue or some other bistro. But I'm hopeful that we will all survive until we get a vaccine that is actually tested rather than the Russian version.
Yes.
I don't think any of us want to hold out our arm, for that.
That's going to be tested, but not on us.
No. And then, we have to deal with the anti-vaxxer question and all kinds of things. So I'm figuring, I just filled out the event grids for winter for a couple of publishers, and they're still looking primarily virtual. And I think it will go on for a while. And I must say, it's an unparalleled opportunity to talk to people we wouldn't normally get to visit with out of the country, in the country.
Yeah, I can't wait till we're all back in the same room again. But hopefully this part of it, the Zoom part of it, people will understand it better. And so those personal experiences we have will be broadcast out far and wide.
You bet. Well, it will certainly give us a lot to talk about and to write about. And as you know, even all of our live events, we have always videoed them and broadcast them all over. So for us, this isn't really any different. What's different is the opportunity to talk to people that we wouldn't normally do. Like my guy Thursday night, Ariel Sabar, who's written this wonderful book about a Harvard professor who was conned by a Florida pornographer into believing that a religious object was genuine. And, that wouldn't have come my way, probably some years, months ago. But I'm excited. I've got an owl expert, a man who's written a wonderful book about the world's largest owl, and its territory is East Siberia. And so we're going to be talking next week, and he has this incredible video of the owl in full flight, and all that. And I think, what fun, I mean, it really is. And Pat over here is our science fiction guy, so he's had a chance to talk to Mary Robinette-Kowal from Forge the other night. And so we're doing more science fiction and romance, sort of broadening out our scope, which is really exciting. And I hope we get to keep some of that, now that we've shown that we could really talk to anybody. You don't have to be a prominent crime figure, to hang out at the Poison Pen. Then I think that we'll be looking at some interesting futures. Anyway, guys, it's been wonderful to see you. Thank you for joining us this evening. And I want to thank all of you who've been watching us on Facebook. Please recommend to your friends that they drop into our Facebook events page and scope it out. And you can also recommend the podcast. There's a podcast bar on the Poison Pen homepage, and this video will be turned into a podcast for people who might like to listen to it. So thanks for coming, and enjoy the rest of your evening.